Merry meet. In this lecture, I'm going to be discussing why it is important to create your own correspondence charts and also give you a little insight on how people come up with correspondences for colors, deities, gemstones, and so on. Now, I'm sure that as you've started on your magical practices, you've noticed that in your readings, many authors will give you charts of what different things mean, such as what colors or gemstones are appropriate for specific purposes, or what's sacred to specific gods and goddesses. A lot of times, these charts differ depending on the person that wrote it. So hopefully this will give you a little insight on why that is. The first thing that I think we need to discuss is what magic is. And you'll hear this over and over again from me. Magic is simply understanding what things such as colors, sight, sounds, scents, textures, different things that you ingest, and whatnot have an effect on a person in a mental, physical, psychological, spiritual manner. So when we understand this as a basic understanding, we can see the reason that correspondence charts work. Because items will have an effect because they bring to mind specific things, specific feelings, specific remembering connections. So that's the reason why we have the correspondences, is because they connect us to the item, and through that item we kind of sense a theme. So, for instance, let's look at the symbol that I have up here. Even if we're in a different country, we don't speak the language, we all see the similarity and understand what this sign means. In most cases, we have an octagon shape with a white border and red in the middle. And because of this, we know what the sign means because our brains connect that shape and that color to mean one thing. We know this means stop. So even if we're in another country and didn't speak the language, we would see this sign, see the color, and see the shape, and say to ourselves, oh, this means I need to stop. And pretty much this is how color correspondence and shape correspondence and correspondence charts and magic works. Our minds connect to different sounds, colors, scents, words, and so on, and make connections. And it's simple as that. The easiest type of chart that we make is the color chart. This is usually the first type of chart that all new magical practitioners come in contact with. And it's the one that most of us use the most. And understanding how these connections are made makes it easier to understand how all correspondence charts are created. So if we look at colors, we automatically make a connection to how each color makes us feel. And we automatically start going through and saying, okay, this color is connected to this color is connected to this. But keep in mind that just because one color works for you does not necessarily mean it works for everybody else. Certain colors and certain correspondences are personal, not universal. There are some universal truths that are simple facts. So most people will have correspondences the same for certain things. For instance, the color white. Now in science, it shows us that the color white is caused by the reflection of all the colors in the spectrum. Because this is a fact, the color white can represent any color that we want it to. So, for instance, if I'm working candle magic and my spell calls for a purple candle and I don't have one, I can use a white candle in place of that color purple candle because it represents every color in the spectrum. This is a universal truth, kind of like the red stop sign. However, if we look at the color green, that's a little bit different. Now, in some cultures, the color green represents financial gain and prosperity. Now, in countries such as the United States, where our dollar bills and whatnot, our currency, we connect with the color green, this would make sense. However, in other countries where the color of currency is not green, this wouldn't make sense. Those people would choose the color that their currency comes from. So if your currency is pink, you would associate pink with finances and financial gain. However, on the same side there, if a person gains their finances through, say, growing crops, they would view green as a perfect color regardless of what color their currency is, because green crops would represent more money, more financial gain. So if you're a farmer, it would mean that green would be a good color for finances. Or if you are a serial gambler, and when you think of green, you think of the green felt on top of a blackjack table, then again, you would connect that with financial gain. So when we're looking at creating our color charts, we need to think of the following. I always say look for where you see this color in nature. Then where do you see this color in everyday life? And how is this color used in everyday language? And from there, we can come up with our color chart. So let's look, for example, at the color blue. So now I need to look at how I see the color blue in nature. So some examples of where I see the color blue in nature would be hydrangeas, water, robin's eggs, and the sky. So now I need to understand what those items that are blue mean to me. So for instance, hydrangeas in my area start to bloom in late summer, early fall. So this represents for me the end of summer, the beginning of autumn, when things are starting to cool down. So the color for me represents entering into the cooler months, which is refreshing after the heat of the summer. Now for water, to me this represents the element of water and everything that the element of water and the elementals represent to me. So everything that connects to water would be with the blue. So this would be the west, the connection with the element and the elementals and everything, sea creatures and all of that. Water also represents to me healing because our bodies are made up mostly of water and you need to constantly hydrate to keep yourself healthy. And then, of course, cleansing because we wash with water unless we're the Wicked Witch of the West and then we melt. For robin's eggs, to me this represents happiness and joy because I always get happy when I see the first robin of springtime. Eggs, of course, represent rebirth, renewal. And then with the sky, to me it represents the idea of relaxation and meditation because I love to lay down and watch the clouds and meditate and see the shapes, and it just is very relaxing for me. Next, I'm going to look at where I see it in everyday life. So the first thing that I think of for blue, for things that you see from day to day, is blue in the police uniform. Now, for me, when I think of the police, I think they are here to serve and protect. So to me, the color blue would be a color that I would connect with protection. Now, of course, that's because I have a positive connection to the police. I have friends who are police officers. So, to me, police is a positive thing. However, if a person's had negative interaction with the police, the color blue may have a totally different meaning to them because of that negative interaction. So, to them, the color blue may not mean to protect. Then the third step, of course, is to look at how the color blue is used in day-to-day language. So in language, when you say someone is blue, that usually means that they are sad and depressed, kind of like our friend Eeyore here. So the color blue could be used as a way to combat sorrow and depression, to lift the spirits, because as the saying goes, you fight fire with fire. So if you use blue when you're blue, this can help remove the blue. So that is how I would come up with what the color blue would represent to me magically. This is how I came up with the color representing the element of water, refreshing energy, rebirth, renewal, happiness, relaxation, meditation, healing, cleansing, protection, and releasing of sorrow and depression. So like I said, the color chart is the easiest of the charts to make because it all comes from a personal understanding and connection. However, when we get into things such as herbs, stones, days of the week, months, and deities, we have to start doing quite a bit more research. We have to look at the stories, where it comes from, and how it interacts with us. So, for instance, with gemstones, we not only have to look at the color of the stone to understand its correspondence, but you also get into where it's mined, what minerals it is made up of, how those minerals react with the body, and then we can also look into mythology and folklore of the gemstone to find even more information. So, for example, let's look at the mythology and folklore of the amethyst. The story of the amethyst comes from the Greeks. The gemstone comes from the Greek word amethytis, which means drunk off of wine. And this is one of the reasons why the folklore goes into saying that whoever wears the stone won't get drunk. It is said that the amethyst absorbs the alcohol and not the person who's wearing the amethyst. So if you're wearing an amethyst, you won't get drunk, according to the mythology. So when we look at the myth, the story is of a woman named Amethyst, who was a handmaiden of the Roman goddess of the moon, Diana. And According to the myth, Amethyst had just finished her duties as working for Diana and was out for a stroll and was on her way back home. Okay, at the same time, and this is a direct quote from a site called The Myth and Lore of the Amethyst, Bacchus was walking about with his tiger in one of those bad moods that a god can find himself in from time to time. Feeling unloved and neglected, he vowed to take his anger out on the first person he happened to come across. So he sees this young woman, and he told his tiger to attack. And as she was being attacked, she called out to Diana for help. Unfortunately, Diana arrived too late and found her handmaiden being torn apart. So, to honor her, she turned the young handmaiden into a white stone, which would be seen as the clear quartz that the amethyst stone actually starts out as. Bacchus realized what he had done, and again, to quote Myth and Lore of the Amethyst, Bacchus felt like a schmuck. So he summoned his best wine, and he poured it over the stone and stained it the shade of violet that we now associate with that stone. Now, the myth that I've just read was Roman. However, the term amethyst comes from the Greek, and so we could always switch out Diana and Bacchus with their Greek counterparts, Artemis and Dionysus. So more than likely the story did originate with the Greeks, not the Romans, but there was always the switching around easily, because when the Romans took over Greece, invaded Greece, they adopted many of their deities and just changed the names. So most of the story is the same, just switching out the appropriate deity's name from Bacchus to Dionysus and Diana to Artemis. Though some of the Greek variations of the story states that Dionysus was insulted by a mortal, which is why he was upset. Others state that he hit on a mortal who turned him down. Either way, he was just in a really bad mood. In the Greek telling, where Diana turned her into the white stone, Artemis turned her into the quartz crystal. Seeing how the amethyst stone is part of the quartz family, this also seems to be a more concrete telling of the tale than the Roman version. Also, in some versions of the Greek tale, Dionysus wept the wine rather than pouring it, that his tears showed remorse. So when we look at the purpose of the amethyst stone, I've already mentioned the purpose for keeping someone from becoming drunk. The story itself upholds this, as it absorbed the stone absorbed the alcohol. Also, in the Greek myths, the amethyst was used as a payment to Dionysus by the goddess Rhea to keep the mortal from losing their mind when drinking. We also see the stone as one of transformation. Again, this is upheld by the myth, as Artemis transformed amethyst into the quartz, and then Dionysus cried the wine, transforming the clear crystal into the purple one. Another of the mythologies is keeping away nightmares. Is another one of the properties that the stone holds, and this is also upheld by the story, because I'm sure the idea of being attacked by a tiger for no real reason is more than likely a nightmare. And the being transformed into the amethyst kept the young woman from being tormented by this nightmare of being attacked by a tiger. Spirituality is another connection for the stone, again, definitely upheld by the mythology. The amethyst prayed to Artemis to save her, and her faith in the goddess, as well as her devotion to her, helped get that message heard. And Artemis rewarded her faithful handmaiden, though she was unable to save her life, by transforming her into the stone. So by researching the myth of the stone, this would also be how we would research the myth of a deity and learn how to make the connections and correspondences with that deity. So, for instance, if we look at this story and in relation to Bacchus or Dionysus, we would see with the story of Amethyst, we would see that connection to him and the tiger, the connection to him and wine, and connection to the amethyst stones themselves. They would all be connected to him and associated with him because of his connection to this myth. So hopefully you've learned a little on how correspondence charts are made, and I do hope that this lecture has helped you on your path and teaching you how to create your own correspondence charts. Mary Park.